Welcome to the inaugural episode of The Mandate. I'm your host, Byron Henry. On The Mandate, we're going to be talking about the intersection of law and politics, both in Texas and nationally. And while opinions will certainly be from a conservative perspective, my goal is to challenge you. My goal is to make you think critically about important subjects. It's not to participate in the continual, never-ending scrolling through the same talking points that we all agree with over and over and over again. So the goal here is that you think critically about subjects so that you can actually engage in the conflict that we're involved in and actually persuade other people. I don't intend on this show to promote doom and gloom so that we can all share in the far extreme outrages of those on the left and just be outraged together as a group. We don't need more of that. I want you, as I said before, at the end of the day, to be able to engage in the process, think critically, and persuade others. Hopefully the result is that we can all make a difference politically, culturally, and spiritually. On today's docket, we'll talk a bit about a couple of issues that are hot off the press, President Biden's Easter message and some rumblings in the Texas House. We'll also talk runoffs in the Republican primaries, along with what could be the final act in the Ken Paxton drama that's been playing out for almost a decade. To do that, later I'll be joined by my friend and law partner Mitch Little, fresh off his, some would say, surprise win in the Republican primary for House District 65. But first, on a little bit more serious note, I want everyone watching to be aware of just what we conservative Christians are up against. As Paul said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but with powers and rulers of the darkness of this world. And it doesn't get much darker than President Biden's proclamation that Easter Sunday, the most holy day of the most holy week on the Christian calendar, was being preempted by a trans day of visibility. So instead of simply letting Christians celebrate the resurrection of our Lord and Savior, President Biden thought it was more important to placate the far left and worship at the altar of the sinful, self-indulgent delusion of transgenderism. Needless to say, Christians were offended, and rightly so. Here's Dr. Jack Graham, pastor of Prestonwood Baptist Church in Plano, on the subject.
Demonic and damnable, and a lot of other deeds that I can think of. How dare you, Joe Biden? And this is not a political statement. This is not about left or right, Democrat, Republican, politically. This is about right or wrong, morally and spiritually.
Dr. Graham goes on to say that to any pastor who was not bringing this up in church, he asked, "What is wrong with you?" What's wrong indeed? This serves as a reminder to all Christian conservatives engaged in the open conflict with the left. They're coming for us, make no mistake about it. I say let them come. Now let's talk some Texas politics, specifically Republican politics. To help me break down what could be the final act in the Ken Paxton drama, what in the world happened on March the 5th, the upcoming May 28th runoffs, and just what's next overall in Texas politics, I'd like to welcome Mitch Little, Republican candidate for state representative in House District 65, which covers Denton County.
Obtained. So this chapter needs to come to a close, Phil.
Well, on Twitter, you kind of explained some of this about how long this process has lasted, including at the end where you said, quote, "We are in the preamble of reform in the great state of Texas, and there will be a proper accounting." Tell us more about that. What do you mean?
Well, let's start with the impeachment. So if you look at last year, we still don't know how much the impeachment cost the people of the state of Texas. The Speaker of the House, Dave Phelan, has refused to turn over the records that would audit the actual cost to the people of Texas of that impeachment process. That should have already come out. It will come out in the future at some point, whether under his leadership or someone else's.
Welcome, Mitch. Thanks for agreeing to be my first guest on The Mandate.
Yeah, that put a really fine point on it right there at the end. I am so happy to be your guest. This is like a continuation of when you come into my office at 6 o'clock in the evening when I'm trying to leave, and we're going to talk politics here for 30, 45 minutes, something like that.
Well, we're busy all day, and obviously both busy at night. So
yeah,
I wanted to have you on because I think you kind of have a core of a lot of things happening in Texas politics right now. You're intimately involved, and we'll talk in a minute about the Ken Paxton saga, which stretches back years, not just recently, not just impeachment, but even before that. We'll get into that. But also you were involved, and we'll also talk about how that happened in the most recent tsunami. I don't characterize, I'll let you characterize it, but from my perspective, being involved in Republican politics for years, what I could only be considered a tsunami, March 5th primary in the Republican primary in Republican politics, and just some of the other issues that we're dealing with in Texas politics right now, as you see them, as you kind of enter the fray. So,
Yeah, incredible.
So tell me a little bit about. Let's start from the end, and then we can work back a little bit. But with respect to what happened in the last, I guess, couple of weeks with the resolution of the fraud and securities charges that some said would put Ken Paxton behind bars, the Attorney General behind bars for 99 years or more.
Yes, so March was lit, as the kids say. So we got to the end of the Ken Paxton saga. You know, the jury trial was set for April 14th, and I've had that week or 2 weeks blocked on my calendar for literally months at this point. And a couple of months ago, there was a hearing in Harris County. I wasn't there, but the rest of the defense team was there, Dan Cogdell, Philip Hilder, and we're meeting with Brian Weiss, and Kent Schaefer, at that time, who had been a special prosecutor on the case for 9 years, decided he wanted off that merry-go-round particularly, and so he withdrew. They brought in a guy named Jed Silverman to help them try the case, and so at that point in time, Brian Weiss says there will never be a pretrial diversion, there will never be a deal in this case. We are going to trial. And then within the last couple of weeks, while I was on spring break, you know, Dan Cogdell and Brian Weiss started getting together, talking about the case, and I started hearing rumblings that there could potentially be a pretrial diversion deal. And I've been on the case for 9 years. I knew how weak the case was, but apparently in the last month or so, when Jed and Brian started interviewing witnesses, they realized how weak the case was. And that tends to bring parties together, and ultimately culminated last week in the pretrial diversion agreement, which thank God for the family that they don't have to go through the ignominy of a trial. And we're, you know, just so pleased to have been able to work it out for 9 years. I mean, that our friendship is longer than that trial, but I mean, the case went on for 9 years. I mean, you and I haven't even been working together as law partners for 9 years at that point. So
that's right. I think we started in 2016.
Yeah. So I'm glad the saga is over, but it presented this great example of lawfare in the state of Texas that came from the right. It didn't come from the left. I mean, the Republicans that helped engineer that case, most of them are out of office now. Almost all of them are out of office. The voters have removed them. But that particular version of lawfare was a relative novelty in Texas until what happened to Ken Paxton happened to him in 2015.
So it took less time to remove the perpetrators of the Ken Paxton scheme to remove him from office. It took shorter time to remove them through the election process than it did to actually get to the culmination of Attorney General Paxton's case.
Absolutely. The voters sniffed that out relatively quickly. I think in the great scheme of things, there were a couple of judges who ended up coming off the bench as a result of it. And George Gallagher, the judge who was assigned to the case, he was just defeated in Tarrant County in his most recent election. So the voters ultimately took care of a lot of the participants in that case and the problem, but there is still residual ugliness and mess from it, and I think it's going to kind of emanate for a while. I mean, there Republicans, particularly those who are supportive of the Paxtons, are still upset about it, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon.
And just so the viewers are aware, there wasn't some major ruling by a court that cut the legs out of the prosecution's case. The facts didn't change. Their case didn't go from being rock solid where they're going to put Attorney General Paxton behind bars. Then all of a sudden, 2 weeks before trial, just explain to the viewers not just your position, but also how does it go from there's never going to be pretrial diversion, this is serious felonies. I think there were lawmakers out there basically saying that Attorney General Patterson was a flight risk, that he was facing life in prison, that this was serious business, and it went from that to basically do some community service and we'll drop the charges.
Yeah, so I think there were a couple of factors that really pushed on that. One, their witnesses fell apart. So as you saw from Brian Weiss, as reported in the Chronicle and other places, the lead witness on the failure to register claim, Fritz Mowry, they took his testimony. They came up here and interviewed him. Judd and Brian did. And apparently, he acknowledged that the whole fiasco was his fault for essentially failing to make a filing on behalf of Ken Paxton. So there went one of the claims. One of the securities fraud supposed victims, Joel Hochberg, passed away last year, or it may have been in 2022. So that claim was going away. And, of course, the Byron Cook victim claim, securities fraud, it was fraught with peril from the beginning because of other things that Byron Cook was involved in. But ultimately, I don't think he was a cooperative witness for Brian Weiss. And so after the call it the factual components of their case fell apart, special prosecutors were still owed, in their belief, several $100,000 worth of work that they had done on the case from the beginning, from the outset. And they've been chasing that money through the legal system, the courts of appeals, Court of Criminal Appeals, for literally years. And they ultimately got a bad ruling here within the last month or two from the Houston Court of Appeals that said, no, you're done. You're not able to get this rate of pay from Collin County or anywhere else. And so as the financial incentive went away and the factual incentive went away, there was really nothing underpinning the case to keep it moving at that point.
So, and that's another thing about the prosecutor pay issue. I know we don't want to get too much into the weeds on the details, but I read an article in the Texas Monthly, not exactly your bastion of conservative conservative writings, about the resolution of the Paxton case. And basically, there was a line in there that struck me, having a front row seat to all this that have happened, and of course being partners with you and kind of knowing how this went down, said that Attorney General Paxton had continually pulled strings to delay the case. So I want you to have the opportunity to tell the viewers right now just how, who and how the case was delayed for 9 years.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think it's important for your viewers, listeners, to understand Ken Paxton had no ability, or our defense team really had no ability to delay the case at all, really. So from the beginning of the case, everything in the case was a one of one. We had special prosecutors who were appointed from a town 4 hours away, to rockstar criminal defense lawyers who were being hired by Collin County at $250 an hour at the behest of a judge. No one other than that judge approved that pay rate. And then all the Collin County judges were accused, and we ended up having the local administrative judge appoint a judge from Fort Worth, George Gallagher, to the case. He, on the state's motion, moves the case to Harris County. I mean, truly bizarre. Moves the case to Harris County 4 hours away from where the Paxtons live.
And when does that happen?
That's a one of one. I mean, to have the state say, we can't get a fair trial here because the defendant is viewed too favorably. Usually it's the inverse. The alleged perpetrator says, the media coverage of me has been so bad, we need to get this case out of my hometown. That wasn't the case here. Weiss and Schaefer were able to convince Gallagher to move the case to Houston. By statute, Judge Gallagher was supposed to come off of the case. He was supposed to hand it to another judge. He refused to do that, refused to come off the case. We had to appeal that. That had to go through the appellate system. Meanwhile, the special prosecutors were appealing their pay, trying to get paid all the way through the Court of Criminal Appeals, in addition to any number of various issues that were appealed. But the primary party doing the appealing was the state, except for the venue question, which caused us to end up in Harris County with what should have been a new judge, and some of the motions to quash. So primarily, the drivers behind all the appeals were the state. They had to work their way through the Court of Criminal Appeals system. You'll recall, your viewers or listeners probably won't recall this, but Judge Luong in Houston said, no, this case should not be in Houston. Judge Gallagher didn't have authority to transfer it here in the first place because his appointment expired, and ordered the case sent back to Collin County. Well, the prosecutors appealed that because they wanted to stay in Harris County. So if you look at the timeline, and we actually did this in a speedy trial motion that we filed with Judge Beal, almost all of the delay was attributable to the special prosecutors. Well, who attributed the delay to Ken Paxton? The media. Every media outlet attributed the delay, saying, oh, he's crawfishing. He's trying to run away from the thing. That has never been the case. We just wanted to get the right answer. We've never felt like the case should have been in Harris County in the first place, but that we were not the cause of the delay by any means.
So now that act in the drama is over, your name became, I've known you,
Yeah.
your friends have known you,
Yep.
clients, but you became more of a household name during the spectacle that was the impeachment of the Attorney General in the fall,
Yeah.
or the impeachment that occurred over Labor Day, or excuse me, Memorial Day weekend, and then the actual trial that occurred in September. And so tell us a little bit about that process and how that began and ended, and how the book was closed on that attempt to remove Attorney General Paxton from office.
Yeah, I mean, you remember when this was all going down. So the week leading up to Memorial Day, I think Ken Paxton and his lawyers and I and you and the people of Texas learned for the first time on about Wednesday that there was an impeachment inquiry going on in the House General Investigating Committee. We didn't know what the context of it was, what they were investigating, what evidence they had been taking for months. But at some point between Wednesday and Friday, we learned that the House General Investigating Committee had been interviewing witnesses, that Ken Paxton did not have the opportunity to make an appearance or offer any evidence or documents or any of that, because the whole thing was secret. It was secret. It was so secret, only a handful of members in the Texas House knew that the General Investigating Committee was even meeting on it. So leadership, Dave Phelan, maybe some of his cardinals, and the people on the General Investigating Committee knew about the inquiry. So after we find out about it for the first time, they're going to have a hearing in the GIC, and Ken Paxton sends one of his lawyers, Chris Hilton, down there with a pile of documents saying, I'd like to be heard. They say, you can't be heard. And the GIC produces a transcript of that hearing for the members. They drop it off for the members, 48 hours. Hey, we're going to have a vote. We're going to vote to impeach. And at that point in time, this is what I know secondhand. We can call this hearsay, but I've got it on pretty good authority. Leadership was whipping votes for the impeachment over that 48-hour period and saying, what do we have to do to get you to vote in favor of this? I mean, these are Republicans talking to other Republicans about a statewide Republican. Totally unprecedented. So it gets to be Saturday morning. I'm at my son's baseball tournament, and Attorney General and I were on the phone, and he says, I think they have the votes. I said, what do you mean they have the votes? He says, I'm hearing that they have the votes. And I'm crestfallen. I can only imagine what he was feeling. And so they take the vote, and I think it's hard to overstate how momentous a moment in Texas political history, the fact that they were having the vote, Republican against Republican, was and is. It was a momentous occasion to be able to say, okay, look at all these Republicans who voted against a statewide Republican with no firsthand evidence, no documentary evidence that any of them were shown, and on 48 hours notice. So Saturday it goes down. They have the vote. My rep voted for it. Your rep voted for it. And I turned to my wife at the baseball tournament. I said, well, there goes our summer. I'm like, we're going to be doing something on this. And as I think probably most people know by now, we started to assemble a defense team. I think we put a very good defense team together, but it was far and away the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. We didn't even have the rules for the impeachment between Memorial Day and I think it was July 17 when the rules came out for the first time. I'm almost positive that's when we got the rules from the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, and his Rules Committee. And so we at least, okay, now we know what the case is going to transpire like. How are we going to get documents? We still didn't have one document from the prosecutors who had been appointed, Rusty Hardin and Dick DeGuerin. And we didn't receive the first document production till basically a month before the trial. There's 400,000 pages that were ultimately produced. We had 1 month to prepare. Easily the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life.
So the summer that you were telling your wife about was basically you looking at PDFs on your computer
Bro,
from dawn to dusk.
You have no idea, man.
Or more.
And more. I was up at the office till 1, 2 in the morning in the summer, going through documents, just trying to get my hands around what the case might be. And obviously we get to the trial, and that's probably a separate hour-long podcast. But
Tell the listeners just briefly what it was like to step into the chamber, because unlike a normal court that you're used to and I'm used to, where you go to court and you have your jury and there may be a few spectators and you've got your witnesses and your interested parties, judges up on the bench. It seems like a different atmosphere. I've been in the Senate chamber, not for the impeachment, but tell the viewers and listeners about what it's like to try a case in the Senate chamber with 31 jurors, so to speak, sitting behind you or around you?
I don't know if anybody other than Patsy Spall is still alive from the previous impeachment. Patsy Spall was actually working. Who's the Senate? What's her role? Historian? No, what is she? Clerk.
Clerk.
I mean, she's a legend there. She's probably going to have a portrait up in the Senate chamber. But she was actually there for O.P. Carrillo's impeachment in the 1970s. And so she was the only one in the building who had experienced anything like it. I had never even been in the building before the first day that I was there. And it's terrifying. Like we were there for the first day. The entire gallery is full of media. There are an ocean of lawyers on the other side. There are about 40 lawyers against us. We had our team.
And you talked a little bit about that in the clip that we saw about the cost of the impeachment. We still don't know, I take it. I know there's been a number of people, including the lieutenant governor, that has asked for an audit. And do we know what? We
still don't know. We know the Senate's share. And we know some of the bills, but we don't have a complete accounting because Dade Phelan's in a runoff. So we're not going to know probably until well after the outcome of that what the total cost of the impeachment was. But, I mean, Byron, when I sat down at council table, I could reach out and touch a juror. I mean, Senator LaMantia is right here on my right, and to her left is Senator Brian Hughes. And, I mean, we were on top of one another. The jury was with us, and then you've got literally the media lording over you from the gallery on the second floor. Totally unique and bizarre situation altogether.
So before we move off this, just tell me when did you feel during the proceeding? When was the first time? I know you're probably nervous. I know you never can tell politically or in jury trials what a jury's going to do. It's hard to read tea leaves. When did you get the feeling that you might be winning the impeachment trial?
So
if you ever got that feeling.
At the end of Wednesday, the first week. So at the end of Wednesday, so about early in the afternoon, middle of the afternoon, I came up to cross-examine Ryan Vassar, and I had just watched Tony Busby take the first witness, Jeff Mateer, and then a young lawyer named Anthony Osso took the second witness, Ryan Bangert, and then we had decided that I was going to take the third witness, Ryan Vassar. And so I get up there and I said, I've been through all the documents. I've read every witness interview. I've watched all the videos. I'm almost positive there's nothing. I mean, maybe I could be surprised, but I don't see anything. And so I'm just going to go for it. And so this guy gets up there, and I blasted him for 2 hours on cross. And I came off the podium. First of all, I came to the podium and I said, I had this like out-of-body experience where I said, I am not here right now and this isn't happening. And then I just launched into my outline. I had this out-of-body experience, and then we closed for the day around 6 o'clock. And I look over at the defense team, and their eyes are like this big. And I'm like, I think that went well. And so we get to the end of that day, and you could just feel the momentum shift. The public narrative was shifting about the trial, and it didn't get any better for the prosecution after that. I think the moment where I went into the trial very confident, still intimidated by the process, but was when I got through their whole document production, I said, that's it? They don't have anything else? So the impeachment prosecution took on a life of its own. It's almost like it assumed this massive political momentum, and no one had an exit strategy on the side of the people pushing it, Republicans pushing it. And they couldn't get off the train. They had to convict him by any means because they were already deep into this thing, and there was no way off. As you saw on March 5th, there was no way off.
And that takes us neatly into our next topic, basically. Congratulations on the impeachment and on the recent successes for the Attorney General. And now I think he can focus on the things he's been doing well, basically defending our liberties and being basically the wall between the Biden administration and the freedoms of the people of Texas.
Yeah, doing a great job.
So that kind of takes us to the train that they couldn't get off of, the March 5th primary. First, just explain what happened that day, and you can weave in there what the Paxton impeachment along with the other issues that we know were circulating with school choice and all that, had to do with what happened on March the 5th.
Okay, well, let's just start with factually what happened that day, okay? At least from the standpoint of Texas writ large. So you had an overwhelming conservative resurgence driving out incumbent Republicans who were more centrist in their, I guess, voting behavior than probably has ever happened in our state's history. So you're having this groundswell of the grassroots who are coming up and driving out Republicans who are voting against fundamental grassroots conservative principles. It's happening. It's happened all over the state. You saw, so Andrew Murr, who was in charge of the impeachment on behalf of the House, decided not to run again. So you have West Verdell replacing him. You have Matt Morgan replacing J.C. Jeton in the Katy or Fort Bend area. And Matt Morgan, like me, had almost $2 million spent against him by Associated Republicans of Texas and TLR. You had Janice Holt defeat Ernest Bales. Ernest Bales and Janice Holt's district's right in the middle of Colony Ridge. Okay, you have my race against Cronda Timish in 65. Mike Olcott defeating Glenn Rogers. So there are incumbents who, in theory, as Republicans in hard Republican districts, are politically safe, finding themselves not so safe and showing up at the end of the day on March 5. And now we've got a massive group of conservative Republicans who have replaced them in the primary. I mean, that's factually what happened. There's a lot more to what went into March 5th, but, I mean, you have a sea change. The ground has shifted underneath our feet politically in Texas, and this is only the beginning.
So you had the impeachment. You had Ken Paxton's the criminal case. You were obviously involved somewhat with the Attorney General and politically in that way.
Yeah.
How in the world do you go from defending the Attorney General in his securities case and impeachment to throwing your hat in the ring to run for House District 65?
Man, it was truly wild. So before we left for the impeachment, my rep, just like yours, voted for the impeachment, okay? And so I have a problem with that. I had supported my state rep in 65. I was her campaign treasurer. I was at her watch parties. I threw a fundraiser for her in 2020, back when she ran the first time. So I was very supportive of it. But what I saw at the beginning of the 22 legislature was what I saw from the 23 legislature that shocked me was really a rejection of what the grassroots had wanted, including myself. My rep went right down and voted for the speaker, Dade Phelan, immediately. That was a problem. He refused to ban Democrat chairs in the Texas House. My rep was voting with the Democrats for sports gambling, casino gambling, voted with the Democrats on impeachment, any other number of votes I could tell you about. But there was this burning that was going on inside me saying, I can't be a part of this anymore, first of all. And two, I've got to do something about it. But I was in the middle of preparing for the impeachment trial, and I said, I'm not even going to think about this until Ken Paxton is safe. So we get out of the impeachment trial. I come home, and it's not like I went, hey, I'm running for office now. I came home, and I had to, first of all, I had to come down from about 2 weeks of adrenaline. That took me about a week and a half. I didn't sleep well for a week and a half, wasn't functioning. And then I started to really think about, well, if not me, then who? Like if no one's going to challenge these incumbents who are rejecting what the grassroots want, who's going to do it? And so I started praying about it. I asked friends about it. Probably had 10 or 15 conversations with my wife about it. And I'm just like, Lord, just give me some kind of sign or confirmation this is what you want me to do. And one night I was with my son after practice, his football practice. And I came into a restaurant, and there were about 6 guys sitting there from my neighborhood. And they said, hey, have you ever thought about running against Cronda? And I was like, that's a pretty good sign. I said, I don't know. I said, would you support me if I did? And they all go, yeah, we would. We would. And so I had the final conversation with my wife, and I said, I think I have to do this. And that's how that journey started. And I wasn't alone. There were a lot of people looking at the incumbents who had voted to impeach, said, I have to do this. And they stepped forward, and man, a lot of people stepped forward with us. I can tell you that from the grassroots. I wouldn't have been able to do it without them.
Thank God for that. So
Yeah.
65 is very fortunate to have you. Coming up on May 28th, are there any particular races you're watching? Obviously, the speaker's race, the runoff with Covey and Phelan. But other than that, are there any particular bellwether races or races that you're looking at to see whether or not the number's going to be, it's already historic, but basically a rout?
Yeah. So here's the thing. There are what I'll call 8 significant runoffs. The conservative options in those runoffs are almost certain to sweep. I mean, just let that sink in for a minute, okay? Well, let's talk about the speaker. First of all, the speaker came in second in his own primary. This is the most powerful Republican in the Texas House. Came in second in his own primary to a guy, David Covey, who is a relative novice to Texas politics. He's, like me, a grassroots guy, relative novice, doesn't have the speaker's millions of dollars, doesn't have TLR or ART on his side, or the governor or any of that. So David Covey beats him in the primary. He just doesn't get to 50%. So traditionally, that data point will tell you that Dade Phelan is almost certain to lose his primary. He's almost certain to lose the runoff. That's important, but the thing I wanted that you know, and I think your viewers and listeners need to know, is that Dade Phelan is he's a symptom. He is not the problem. The problem in Texas is that the House needs reform. He is one symptom of that problem, but we're not talking about like he is your HVT, he's the Osama bin Laden that we need to get rid of in order to make every problem go away. It's not. You remove him, there are 5 people just like him ready to take his place in the Texas House. That's the fundamental problem. There are a group of Republicans who are so embedded and dug in leadership that are totally deaf to the grassroots that they feel they can essentially perpetuate their influence in the Texas House. I think the runoffs are going to tell them that they're wrong. The ones that I'm watching that I'm most excited about because of where we live here, Carissa Richardson, Katrina Pierce. So Carissa Richardson is obviously running against Fred Frazier. She already beat him in the primary. She just didn't get a majority.
That's in McKinney, House District 61. Right?
Yes, sir. You know the numbers better than I do, so I'll take your word for it. Carissa's going to beat Frederick Frazier. Katrina Pearson. I'm sorry. Carissa's going to beat Frederick Frazier. Katrina Pearson is almost certain to beat Justin Holland. He took some bad Second Amendment votes. He has the governor's endorsement against him. A lot of negative momentum in Justin Holland's campaign. So Carissa, Katrina Pearson, Andy Hopper is running against Lynn Stuckey. Lynn Stuckey is one of what Texas Scorecard calls the Dirty Dozen, some of the Cardinals that support Dade Phelan in the Texas House. David Lowe against Stephanie Click. Very excited about that one. Stephanie has taken some bad votes on some gender stuff in the Texas House in addition to the impeachment. David Lowe is very well positioned. I'm very excited about those. There's some other runoffs. We could go one by one, but the other one that most people are not thinking about is I met a fellow named Adam Hinojosa who's running in South Texas against a Democrat. This is a November thing. This isn't a runoff, but the data is pretty indicative that he's going to take that seat. He's going to take it away from the Democrats. Similar situation with Steve Kennard over in our neck of the woods in Collin County, who's running against Mihaela Plesa.
House District 70.
Very well positioned in order to be able to take that seat back. I'm very excited, not only because of the opportunity to potentially get some new blood in there, but these new voices mean the likelihood of reform is increasing rapidly. And so when I say reform, I mean that we don't have an imperial speakership that can essentially go on in perpetuity where that person, is the only person that matters in the Texas House from the standpoint of controlling votes. We need to make some rule changes. I can get into detail on those, but there are some significant reforms that I think need to take place, and changing out some of the old guard who haven't been protecting the grassroots is a significant part of that.
Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on the next speaker's race. Not as much names, unless you have some,
sure,
but traits, positions, the reform you're talking about, what you need to see.
Yeah.
so to speak, from a speaker, what people that you know and some incoming freshmen, if you know, would need to see from a speaker before they can throw their hat or support behind him or her.
So Dave Phelan told the Republican caucus here on Monday in Frisco when they met, told them, I'm gonna be the speaker. I'm gonna win. Everybody's got doubts about that, including me. I don't think he's going to win in the first place, but in the second place, I sincerely doubt he's going to be the speaker. Tom Oliverson, as you saw, Dr. Tom Oliverson made an announcement a couple of weeks ago about his candidacy for the speakership. And what he led with was, we need to ban Democrat chairs of committees in the Texas House. And the impeachment was rushed. We've got some things that we need to fix. He wasn't super specific about all the things that we need to fix, but let's talk about what a good speaker might look like. I think you need a term-limited speaker in the Texas House, somebody who's not going to be serving for 10 or 20 years, but maybe 1 or 2 terms in that role, because the centralization of power is not good for a House that is a House where members each represent about 205,000 people.
And right now, there's no term limit. As long as you get the vote, you can remain speaker, correct?
That's right. We need to change the rules to essentially some people call it the Hastert rule. I'll avoid calling it that. It's the majority rule. If we're in the that a bill will not come to the floor for a vote in the Texas House unless a majority of Republicans are supporting the bill. That's one of the reforms we need to make.
So you would not have situations where what would be considered a Democratic priority or whatnot would be able to take all the Democrats and cobble together a few Republicans and get a bill not only passed but to the floor.
That's right, absolutely. We need to get the alcohol off the floor of the Texas House. I'll just let that hang for a second. We need to get the alcohol off the floor of the Texas House. These people, including me, nobody should be drinking when we're doing the people's business in the Texas House. We need to realign leadership in the House so that the committee chairs are not solely selected by the Speaker. We need the caucus to be able to identify that leadership together as one. So a push for unity in that regard so that power is not just completely centralized in the hands of a few Republicans that are embedded there. I think we need to get rid of the House parliamentarians. I think you see that Hugh Brady during the election cycle became kind of a central focus and lever for political animosity because he worked in the Obama White House and he's Dave Phelan's parliamentarian, and he killed multiple conservative priorities from the floor. We can't have that. We can't have that.
And that's by points of order and other parliamentary, which are debatable to say the least on some of those.
Ultimately, the parliamentarian has no power other than what the Speaker empowers him to do. And so parliamentarians there to advise the Speaker. Ultimately, the Speaker has to be the person deciding whether bills come to the floor for a vote or whether they're killed on a point of order. And we need fairness, mutual respect, kindness among the members. These are some of the reforms that I think we have to look forward to in a new Speaker.
Before we wrap up, let's talk just a minute about something that just hit the news, I think, in the last news cycle or a couple news cycles, and that is this idea, and I don't even have my hands around exactly what it means, so I've only read the reporting and the headlines, but It appears that the Texas Ethics Commission, the body that regulates politics, I guess would be our version of the FEC, TEC, Texas Ethics Commission, is considering a rule in which they would regulate political speech by requiring disclaimers under penalty of fine or whatnot for political speech if it's compensated. I take it you've heard about that.
Yeah.
It sounds like a terrible idea to me. Anytime you start talking about regulating political speech, I start wondering, that usually just means shutting down conservatives. But I'll let you speak to it if you have any views on that or what you think in general about that proposed rule.
Yeah, so the proposed rule from the Texas Ethics Commission last month in March was an amendment to Rule 26.1 concerning tagging political advertising with the disclaimer. I mean, you've seen the disclaimer by around 1 million ads like political advertising paid for by yada, yada, yada. So the idea here is to remove what I would call the de minimis exception to the political advertising rule that, look, if you got $100 or less for it, then you don't need to put the political ad paid for language underneath there. So why do they want to remove that? There was a lot of momentum this election season and during the impeachment about paid tweets. You may have seen some news about paid tweets, all right, that you might pay an influencer.
The media focused on the ones that were supportive of the Attorney General, but obviously it was going both ways.
All right, so just stop and appreciate the irony of this. Public dollars paid a public affairs firm on behalf of the House to promote the impeachment. Tens of thousands of dollars of your money and my money were paid to a PR firm to promote the impeachment, which is promoting political advertising against a political candidate or political officer. In this case, it was Ken Paxton. But the criticism, 100% of the media criticism, has been about alleged payments made on behalf of Ken Paxton during the impeachment through Brad Parscale's firm, Influenceable, I believe is the name of it. And so why is the Texas Ethics Commission, the commissioners are almost entirely appointed by the governor or the lieutenant governor. They may all be lawyers, okay? Why are they concerned with this rule? Well, the idea is that if I can make you put a political disclaimer on a tweet that you got $5 to post, then I can control you. I can get my hooks in you. I can make you come down to the Texas Ethics Commission and respond to a complaint. So for, maybe a $20 tweet, I can make you spend $10,000 in lawyer's fees showing up at the Texas Ethics Commission to respond to this complaint. What's that going to do, Byron? You as a lawyer, what do you think that's going to do?
Sounds like just what it's designed to do, and that is chill political speech.
Chill political speech.
Which, last I checked, was still protected by the First Amendment. So
why would you even want to do that in the first place? So if you're the Texas Ethics Commission and MAGA Grandma 091689 posts a $5 tweet, why do you want her to come down there and appear to you and file an answer, have a hearing? Why do you want that? It's not that you want her to be there. It's that you don't want her to exist.
Right.
You don't want her to speak on behalf of anyone else.
Well, I was going to ask you.
I think that's fundamentally broken, wrong. We should wholesale reject it.
Well, and it's not only broken and wrong. The appointees are from a conservative Republican governor or executive. So obviously Republicans, conservatives this is one of the things that we actually control and can do something about it. If we can't, I was just about to ask you what's next for you. You can add to your list of things, which I'm sure is growing by the day. Take care while you're in that Texas House of that TEC rule. But no, to wrap up, tell us what's next. What do you think's next for the Texas House, and specifically what is the next policy battlefield you see down the pike? Now that I kind of look at obviously abortion, tragic, wrong. Texas and has dealt with it as a state. We basically banned it. I saw some statistics which were just super encouraging the other day about how few abortions have been carried out in the state of elective abortions in the state of Texas since the Dobbs decision and since the law went into effect. And it seems like that's cooling.
Yeah,
certainly. But what do you see as the next policy battlefield? Similar to the abortion that basically the conservatives have been fighting for 50 years.
So I think the next policy battlefield is going to be determined by the personnel that are on the battlefield. So you look at the end of May, you're going to continue reshaping the House through runoff. I think probably all 8 of them will win against the incumbents. But let's say you got 6 or 7. We still fully haven't shaken out for leadership in the Texas House what the composition of the House is going to be. There are people who are desperately clinging to influence. You've seen some of those people who are fully intending on going down with the Dade Phelan ship. They picked out their chairs on the Titanic. The people who've called Ken Paxton a sophisticated criminal and are going to ride that all the way to the scene of the crash. We haven't figured out the total composition of the House yet, but let's say that I'm right, okay? Let's say that we reshape the Texas House in a more conservative way. What is the first thing that's going to be done? Well, the governor and lieutenant governor are saying, well, it's going to be school choice. That needs to happen in the first 30 days, okay? I think the more conservative members who are being elected to the Texas House are going to go, we want a better bill. We want a better bill than the one that showed up at the last special session. That was going to be very limited in purpose. And
so the issue is not whether there's going to be, quote, school choice, but what does school choice look like?
And
what are the details?
How good is it going to be, school choice? I think we're going to have to continue to wrestle to the ground the problem of funding in public education, because every school district that I have talked to is underwater in their budget for the next year. That's something that's going to need to be addressed in tandem with the school choice question. Okay.
That of course should include Robin Hood and the involuntary transfer of funds from district to district.
How do we pay for it? For example, Louisville ISD in my district, we're sending $36 million to Austin in recapture funds while they're $12 million behind budget. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out this problem. I think a couple of other things that are going to have extreme momentum, the foreign enemies land question. Are we going to allow China, Russia, North Korea, Iran or their affiliates to own land in Texas? I think that question is going to need to be dealt with. Another issue, I think the Democrats are planning on running on the issue of abortion in November.
Absolutely.
This is the
on
issue.
The ballot in Florida. They say that now Florida's a swing state because of abortion's on the ballot in Florida.
I sincerely doubt that, but what I want to tell you is I think we as Republicans need to be leading the charge to protect things like in vitro fertilization in a life-affirming way. We need to be leading the charge because otherwise Democrats are going to be looking at that issue going, see, Republicans don't care about life. They just care about abortion. Well, hey, if we have an opportunity as conservatives to help shape policy around things like IVF in a life-affirming way, we have to do it, and we have to do it now. The other thing that I think is going to continue to be an issue is ongoing compression of property taxes to the point of, or with the end goal of elimination in mind. And so Governor Abbott said, hey, and Glenn Hager said, hey, we're expecting a $20 billion surplus. How much of that is going to go back into the pockets of the people who put them into office? I hope a lot of it does.
Now let's see if we can vote on returning some of that to the people before we grow the size of government when the session starts next time.
Music to my ears.
Well, Mitch, that's very encouraging. It's great to talk to you, and just every time I'm on my phone or talking to other people and I feel down in the mouth, this is a pick-me-up. So, my viewers and listeners might need me to have you on more often just as a prescription, as a pick-me-up.
Well, hey, listen, if you want to really become an optimist, have a couple $1 million spent against you by another Republican, stand in a parking lot for a couple weeks, sweating and freezing and doing every other thing, and talk to every voter you can, then you can earn the right to be an optimist. I think I've done that along with a lot of people like you who helped me, and I'm just so appreciative.
You're certainly welcome, and thank you, Mitch Little, for joining us today. How do people follow you or get in touch with you?
You can follow, the easiest place to find me is @RealMitchLittle on Twitter. That's an easy one. Obviously, my campaign site is MitchLittleForTexas.com. But I'm not that hard to get a hold of. Honestly, you got a hold of me. So
That's right. Well, thank you again, and I thank Emilio and the entire Real News PR production team for today. Thanks to all the grassroots viewers and listeners who are working to make a difference out there. Please subscribe to The Mandate Show, and if you want to comment or get in touch with me, you can send an email to host@themandateshow.com. Until next time, we're adjourned.